Oh, g'day. My name is John, and this is another video in a series of videos I've done on these Chinese diesel air heaters. And the subject of today's heater is install in a motorhome. Now, in the past I've had a number of people ask for a motorhome install video, but I've resisted to date because there are plenty of videos out there, quite good videos, about the install in motorhomes or caravans. But recently, the owner of this particular vehicle, a girl called Jen, who chases the summer all the time and hates the cold, she's asked me to do one in her motorhome because normally she spends the Australian summer travelling around in the motorhome here, and then in the Australian winter, in the Northern Hemisphere summer, she goes over to Europe and travels around Europe, or in our boat. She actually owns half my boat in the Med. So because of the COVID-19 incident and the lockdown, she is locked into touring Australia at the moment through the Australian winter. So I agreed to do the install for her. That way I can kill the two birds with one stone. Now, do you like how I disguised the number plate there? Okay. There is a lot that I'd like to discuss in this video, so I'm going to make it into two parts, and that way I can put a lot more detail in. So this is part one, and let's get started. First up, there are four basic things that you need to consider before you install a heater in your motorhome. Now, one is size, two is power availability, three is your fuel delivery, and four is the location. So we'll start off with size. Now, the size of the heater is really dependent on the environment that you're going to operate in. You know, is it going to be snowing and blizzard type conditions, or is it going to be like a Queensland winter, which only gets chilly? The other consideration of size is the size of your motorhome or caravan, and this install would apply just as well to a caravan. How good is your insulation? You know, how long do you want to run the heater for? So basically, there are three Chinese diesel air heaters available on the market. There's the 2 kilowatt, there's the 5 kilowatt, and there's the so-called 8 kilowatt. Now, those who have seen my other videos know at the time of doing this video, there's no such thing as an 8 kilowatt air heater. This is just a 5 kilowatt rebranded and sold as an 8 kilowatt. But if you've got one of these, that's fine, just don't expect 8 kilowatts out of it. Alright, now the size, as mentioned before, if you have a small motorhome, a small caravan, you know, a small camper van, the 2 kilowatt would be more than adequate for you. If you've got a bigger motorhome, then the 5 kilowatt, now this one is a 7 metre, around 21 feet long, and I'm going to install a 5 kilowatt heater in this motorhome. As I said, if you've got one of these, that's fine too, but you won't get the 8 kilowatts, but you'll get the 5 kilowatts out of it. The other thing with size is that where you want to install it. So if you want to install a heater under a seat, then this one is probably the one that you want to go for because it will fit under the seat. This one's a little bit large. But when you're considering the size, remember this part here and the bolt fittings and these fittings are all exactly the same, no matter what heater it is. So if you find that this heater is too small and you want to put a bigger heater in, all you do is unbolt it, take it out and put the other one in. Or if you started off with one of these heaters, you found it was too hot for you and you want to go to a smaller size, just unbolt it and put in the smaller heater. Now, the next thing we need to consider is the power availability. Now, although these diesels run on diesel, they actually require amps to run, and so they require a little bit of amps to run the controller. They require 10 amps to actually start the glow plug and start the heater, and they require amps for continuous running, and basically that is the fan. So, and also the fuel pump, to run the fuel pump. So you have to have some power to run these, and this is where you need to consider do you have the power availability for the conditions that you're operating in and how you want to operate the heater. Now if you're a minimalist sort of person and you want to conserve power, you have a kerosene light, you read with a headlamp, and your house battery is, say, a little motorbike battery, just enough to charge your iPad, then these heaters are probably not suitable for you. Alright, so if you've got a normal motorhome or a normal caravan and you've got a house battery or two house batteries, then these are fine. But you need to consider your power consumption. Now, as I said before, these heaters require delivery of 10 amps to start the glow plug and to start the system going. So if you can't supply 10 amps, then you've got troubles. The other thing is that these heaters require power to run. Running them on the lowest level, you're going to be drawing 0.7 to 0.8 of an amp, so 0.7, 0.8 amp hours. Running them on a high setting, then you're going to be running perhaps 3 amp hours, so 3 amps per hour you're going to be drawing out of your batteries. Now if you're, say, got a small heater and you have to run it flat chat all the time, then you're going to be drawing around the 3 amps, because remember the current is from the fan spinning and the pump. So the current draw to make the heat is virtually the same whether you have a 2 kilowatt or a 5 kilowatt heater. So if you're running your heater flat chat and you're pulling about almost 3 amps of current out, so you're pulling, and you run it for 12 hours a night, you're pulling out 36 amp hours out of your battery, and that is significant. And if the mornings are blizzard and you don't have sunlight or solar power, then you're going to have trouble with a flat battery. But if you turn it on for 2 hours a night and 2 hours in the morning to heat up like we do in the boat, then there's no real problem with it. But these are the things that you need to consider. The other thing that you need to consider is that, as I said, the power consumption is the same for putting out the heat. So if you're running this one flat chat to put out the heat, and you've gone undersized for the vehicle that you've got, you're going to be drawing 2 amps to have this fan running and everything like that. Whereas this one, it'll put out about 2 kilowatts at say 1.5 to 2 amps, and so you're going to use a lot less amps to have the same heat output as the smaller one. So as I said, you need to consider your power consumption and the recharging. Now look, it's not an issue if you don't have solar and it's a blizzard. Then all you need to do is you wake up in the morning and you just start your engine and run your engine for half an hour or something to recharge your batteries. It's much better to have it that way than to be freezing in the bed. But as I said, if you run it 24 hours a day, then you're going to be using a lot of current. If you're only using it a couple of hours in the morning and a couple of hours in the evening, well then there's not such an issue. But one thing that you need to consider is your power consumption and the power availability of your vehicle. Now the next thing I'd like to talk about is your fuel system. Now if you've got a caravan or a petrol motorhome, you have to have some sort of diesel tank. Now a simple method, and was a way I was actually going to do Jen's motorhome. She's got some water tanks on the back, and I was going to install one of these. Now this is just a normal jerry can with an outboard motor sort of pickup on it. Has a non-return valve in there. Now that will easily go into this position here, and I was going to just go cut a hole down through here and then take the fuel system back underneath the van to the fuel pump and then up to the heater. So if you've got a caravan, you can mount a separate fuel tank that you can use for diesel somewhere on the van or in the motorhome here. If it's a difficult situation with the fuel, you can use a fuel tank on the back. Now why I say difficult situation, modern motorhomes, modern diesel engines, they'll come with a a fuel pump actually in the fuel tank itself, and you can't just tee into the fuel line because it'll overpressure, and it'll overpressure the fuel pump when the motor's running, and when the motor's not running, your little fuel pump won't have enough suction to suck up the fuel. So what you can do is you can put a standpipe like this is just folded over, you straighten it out, cut it off an inch or so above the bottom of the tank so you don't suck all the fuel out of your tank and then can't start the vehicle. The other situation, and what happened here, is Jen had an issue with her fuel gauge, and they said it was a fuel sender unit in the tank itself, and so they had to drop the tank out. And I said to her, or advised her, while they've got the tank out, ask them to put a fuel pickup system in, and then I can just plumb into that when I install the heater. And this they did. The other thing to be aware of is that a lot of European vehicles, I don't know about American vehicles, but they already come with a standpipe already installed in the tank for future use of a diesel heater, because they call them parking heaters over there, and a lot of vehicles are set up for parking heaters. So the reason they call them parking heaters is basically when they park up, the trucks park up at a parking station, they get very cold, so when they turn their engine off, and then they just start the parking heater, and then they keep themselves warm in the cab of the truck, in the sleeper cab of the truck. Okay, all right, I'll come back a bit. Okay, the next thing I'd like to discuss is location and where you mount the heater. Now this is something that you'd have to do yourself and go into different considerations. Some people mount the heaters underneath the passenger seat, and there's generally plenty of room to put a 2 kilowatt heater. A lot of vehicles don't have the room, so you can't put in a 5 kilowatt, but this will go under the seat, and in many vehicles you can just cut into the floor and just run this through, and this will seal around the metal floor. If you wish, there's nothing really stopping you from putting a heater coming out the back. You know, perhaps you've got a certain type of vehicle, you want it out the back, so you can mount the heater on its side like this, mount it, and say under a seat inside, and then these pipes will come out the back and run your heater like that. If you mount it on the side, you can only mount it one side. You must mount it on the side that the glow plug is on the top, not on the bottom. But ideally you mount them this way, but you can mount them this way providing the glow plug's on the top. I'll go into a bit more, and I'll go in the consideration when I look at where I'm going to mount Jenny's for you. One area that you can install these heaters is under one of the seats. Now, some make it quite easy to install under the seats. This is a VW Crafter, and it's not so easy. But here under the seat, you've got room to put the heater, but you've got a beam here. But what you could do is you can bring the heater down through the floor here, the exhaust through the floor, but you can't mount the heater flat. So what you have to do here is, you want to mount it under the seat, you've got to have a metal bracket here to hold the heater up, probably about 75-80 millimeters off the floor, and then run the pipes down, the exhaust pipe down through the floor, and you can only run it down through this area here. You've got beams in that here. The other area that you can is you can find different spots. Now, I suggested to Jen that she mount a 5 kilowatt heater to give her more heat with less noise. Now, if she did that, we couldn't have put a 5 kilowatt under here, under the seat there, it would be just too tight. So there are other options. She could mount it at the bottom of this cupboard here, or under one of these back seats. She initially wanted it down here, but if she put it here, it would be nice and tidy, and she'd still have this part here as a locker. But right here is over the wheel well, and if you ran the exhaust out through there, you're running the risk, well, you couldn't anyway, because there's just not enough room. You go over a bump and the wheel would come up and tear the exhaust off. So this is where I decided to mount it. Now, I'll make a wall to lock off this outside locker, so I'll build a wall here and I'll mount the heater here, so this will lock it off from there. So that part is decided now. Now the other thing I need to show you is that if you mount the heater through metal, you don't need this metal plate. So you just seal it down here, and this here is only for timber floor or something like that. The other thing I want to bring to your attention is between the 2 kilowatt and the 5 kilowatt heater, this part here is exactly the same. The exhaust is exactly the same. The air intake is exactly the same. The fuel pickup is exactly the same. These mounting plates work on a 2 kilowatt heater or a 5 kilowatt heater. They are all exactly the same. So if you initially decided that you were going to try a 2 kilowatt heater, that's fine. But if you made provision and gave it enough space, that if you found that the 2 kilowatt was not hot enough for you, it's no trouble then to just swap this out. All you have to do is under the hose clamps on these three. That comes out and the 5 kilowatt goes straight in. Right, as I said, if you're going through a metal floor, you do away with this and just use that. If you're going through a wood floor, or in this case here it's a composite floor, you have to have some bracket. You just can't drill the two holes, so you have to either drill an oval hole, a round hole, or a rectangle hole. And you need some sort of fitting like this here. Now you can buy these online. If you search for wood floor bracket for Webasto or Urbaspec diesel air heater or diesel parking heater, you'll get something like this, where it has a ring spot welded to this bracket. Two things that you need to be aware of. One is the height of the ring here. Is that high enough to go through your floor? Now this one here looks like only probably 15 millimeters, so it goes through a normal 12 millimeter floor. It won't go through a composite floor, it's not big enough. The other thing is that by the time you purchase this, these are about 1/3 the cost of an entire heater, and it just seems excessive. The next thing you could do is you could go to a metal shop, get them, find out how thick your floor is, get them to roll up a bit of metal like that and spot weld it. And by the time you pay labour and everything, you might even come up to the cost of here, but at least you'd have one that is deep enough. But my solution is to go to a hardware store and buy one of these. Now these are downpipes for guttering. This costs, I don't know, $4 or $5. And if you buy two of them and you get the second one and you slot it like this, this one can come up the bottom and this one could go on the top. So you can just pull them together and you have a nice tight little fitting, and totally isolate out the floor. So that's what I've done, and I'll show you more in a moment. Here we have the 5 kilowatt heater in the proposed space. Now I can bring the hot air outlet through the wall here, and there's plenty of room for the inlet air. Now you can either have recirculating air, which can recirculate from here and then come out, you know, through these slots, or if you wished, and if you're one of those people who like fresh air, it'd be quite easy to put a vent in here and from the outside, and then bring fresh air in from the outside. Now whether you have the recirculating air or the fresh air from the outside is purely a personal preference. Some people love it, some people don't. The one issue you may come across with it from the outside is the getting dust into it, but these motorhomes have got vents around the fridge area, so they're going to get dust in anyway. Okay. This is where I'm going to mount this heater. Now, come out 100mm. We'll mount it in the middle, midway between there, so the heater's in the middle. And as you're taught from a young fella, measure twice, cut once. But now I'm retired and old, I like to measure 3 times and cut once. So I think this will be the spot where we'll do it. Now we'll drill a testing hole through. I've already checked underneath to see that we're right, but let's check that, and we'll go downstairs and just see where it came out. I put the motorhome up on some chocks, and I've got some brackets there to hold it up, and I've got the wheels chocked, so I don't want it rolling off. Now, okay, so here's the drill coming through the floor. This is quite a good area. We've got plenty of room here. All that will be coming through here will be the exhaust, the fuel line, and the combustion air intake. Well, that'd be good. I can bring the combustion air intake, put a filter on it and mount it up here. It'll be behind the mudguard here. And the exhaust, I can bring it out, run it around the back here and down towards the back. The fuel line can come up, run along here, and then down this beam to down to the fuel tank. So this will be a good spot. Now I can measure this here. I can find out how thick the floor is. All right, I'll come back in a minute. Okay, measuring that from what was out the bottom, I find that the floor is about 50mm or 2 inches thick. So this might be a little bit short, but we'll just see how we go. It's a 100mm, so I'll now go and get a 100mm hole saw, and we cut the hole. Okay, I'll measure again, and I'll cut the hole. Now, this is a composite floor. It's plywood, foam, and ply, and then metal on the bottom. On the top is no problem, but when we cut it, we'll cut it from the top and from the bottom. Because we're going through metal on the bottom, we need a bimetallic hole saw, which is this one here. So I'll start the top, and we'll go through the top, and then I'll go onto the bottom. I need 2 hands here. I'll come back. Okay, now I'll start on the bottom. Here again, I need 2 hands, so I'll have to come back. Okay, there's the cutout. Now make sure you wear a mask, because all this will fall on you. And you don't want to be breathing in bits of aluminium and polystyrene and plywood. So there's our floor, very well insulated floor, and I think these motorhomes are very well made. All right, let's go and have a look inside now and see how things go inside. But when you've got the actual walls are made as this too, so these motorhomes are very, very well insulated. If you put curtains over the windows, you know, you could keep yourself warm, well, with a 2 kilowatt heater quite easily. But my personal belief and preference is to use a 5 kilowatt heater running slower rather than a 2 kilowatt heater, you know, running flat out, because most of the noise is in the fan. Right, so that's going to go quite well. That will fit in there just ideally. That will come over the top. Very, very good. Okay, so I'll clean it up now, and what I'll do first is I'll have to make a wall across the back here to keep the heater separate from this external locker, because we don't want anything coming in onto the heater itself. So I'll clean this up and then make a little plywood wall, and I need to put that wall in then before we can proceed with the install of the heater itself. Okay, here's the hole cut out. The sealing ring, I suppose, whatever you want to call it, is in. Now there's the wall. I've made a template with some cardboard, but I couldn't fit it in one go because of the power points and all this wiring here. I didn't want to pull all that out just to get the wall in, so I made it in two parts, and I'll join it. The other thing, I was going to make it right to the top, but I found I had trouble with the seatbelt fastenings up here, so I've had to drop it down, so now there will be a gap on the top, but that's fine. It'll give an air gap, so we'll get a bit more ventilation with it. The next thing I need to do, well, first I need to paint this and seal it, put this in before I put the heater in. But the other thing I must do is, and you must do as well if you're doing this, now here we've got a composite floor, ply foam ply, and I will seal this up. I'll get some epoxy, a bit of epoxy, two-part epoxy, and I'll just seal that up and then paint it. If you don't have epoxy, providing you get a good seal here and paint it, that's fine, because you're putting one of these in, and you put this in with some nice silicone. That will seal it up, but you don't want any moisture getting up and running into the end grain. I'll just digress a little bit here and tell you about the polystyrene. This is a very good method of making a composite sort of panel, but if you do that, you must only use polystyrene, and the same with in fact, only use polystyrene everywhere. Don't use that yellow polyurethane stuff. I've seen so much problem with it. Now, people use it for their fridges and everything, and the selling point is, by the marketing people, is that it has a higher R value than polystyrene. In other words, it's a better insulator than polystyrene. But that is only while it is totally dry. As soon as it gets a bit of moisture in, all the insulation factor's gone. Now, polyurethane absorbs water like a sponge. It is a terrible sort of material. And I've seen so much trouble. People put it in boats and they have no idea. Within a very short period of time, the boats get heavier and heavier and heavier. And I actually, going back many, many years ago, a dive instructor of mine, one of my diving instructor mates, he bought a fancy boat, and it was twin skinned and it had polyurethane in it, totally unsinkable. Well, one day, I think he only had it 2 years, and the boat sank. It was just so full of water, and the polyurethane absorbed the water. And another case, our sailing boat in the Med, when we bought it, it was 10 years old when we bought it. That was 10 years ago. We've had it, it's now 20 years old. The fridge system was just inefficient, and the compressor was running most of the time without cycling all the time. And I suspected I knew probably what the problem was. And so I cut a hole in the bottom with a hole saw, and out came, I think we pulled out 5 litres of water out of the insulation, just drained it out. So I've left a hole now in the bottom, and hopefully it'll drain out. The issue with polyurethane is that it just sucks up moisture like a sponge. And even if you have it in a fiberglass insulating around a fiberglass container, a lot of people don't realise that fiberglass is actually semi-permeable, and the amount of water vapor that transmits through the fiberglass skin is dependent on the thickness of the fiberglass. So in a fridge situation, you have a fairly thin skin, maybe, I don't know, maybe a millimetre, and the water vapor just goes straight through that into the polyurethane. And we also had trouble in Australia, you know, back 30 years ago or so, where they used polyurethane to make insulated refrigeration trucks, and they were all a disaster after a few years. And same as coal stores, they absorb water, and to the extent that some of them actually bent the coal source couldn't take the weight of the extra water that was absorbed into the membrane. All right, sorry, that's just digressing a bit, and we'll move on. Now I like the belt and braces philosophy, so I'm putting some 2-part epoxy around the edge on the end grain here. Now you could just get by with painting it and you know, put a good primer and a good paint on it, but I've got plenty of this epoxy here, so it's no effort for me to just do a bit of belt and braces to make sure that there's no chance that any water is going to get into the end grain here of the plywood. Okay, I've got my hole cut out. I've got my nice little metal inserts. This one will go in the top. This one here I've cut slots in it. It will come out from the bottom. And so what I'll do is I'll push this one down. This one will go inside the this other one. And so I'll push it down nice and tight. And so it'll make a nice sealed up edge there. Now, very important that you make sure you seal the end grain of the plywood, and you seal the hole. You don't want any moisture getting into the core in here. So I've put a layer of epoxy, thickened epoxy glue, just spread it around, and then I've just primed and painted it. Okay, what I'll do now is I'll install the bottom plate with some sealant. I put a couple of screws in there so I can screw it on, and I'll do that now. We'll come back. Okay, I'm going to put a bead of silicone. This is going to be the bottom plate around here, and then screw it on. I like to use Sally's Wall Clear or Fuller's Max Seal for this sort of job. It's a very good sealant, and you know, it can go onto wet surfaces. It's nice and clear, and it's easy to tool, and you can paint it over. But you can use, you know, whatever you like. A silicone sealant would be okay as well, but that's just my personal preference here. All right, I'll go down and push that up from underneath and screw it on, and I'll come back in a minute. There's the hole from underneath. I'm going to push this up, our bottom one up. And put 3 screws in that, and then I'll push the top one in. Okay, I put one of these fittings in the hole, and it slides inside the fitting that I've pushed up from the outside. Now I'll put some adhesive around underneath here. Whether you put screws in or not is really up to you, but if you can hold it down. But if you put the screws in, you have to countersink them, because this plate goes on the top and it can't ride proud of the screws. So I'll just countersink these a little bit more. Just use a countersinking bit. I can put the screws in there, and then I can lock that down. Okay, we've got our hole done, got the wall in. Now it's time to install the heater. Now there are 2 ways you can go here. Remember, we're going through a wooden floor, or not a metal floor. If we were going through a metal floor, this would be our gasket here, the silicone gasket here, and we would just bolt the heater straight down. But because we're going through a wooden floor or a composite floor, what we need to do is we need to put this backing plate on. Now, the 2 ways you can go. One is you can go a fixed plate. So in other words, we bolt the plate down here now, and then we put the heater on and bolt it through from underneath, just like we would if we're in the going through a metal floor of a truck or something like that. Or you can go the removable plate method, in which case you bolt the plate down onto the heater, and when you remove the heater for maintenance, you take out the whole plate. The other way, you get underneath and the plate is fixed here, and you remove just the heater. Which way you go is purely up to you. I'll show you some pros and cons now. remember we're going through here, so if it is very deep, sometimes it's difficult to get the hose clamps on back through the floor. And remember, this floor is particular here is what, 60 odd millimeters, so twice the depth here, so it's difficult to get them on. Now sometimes it's better to bolt the plate on first and then remove the whole plate and heater when you go, but as I said, it's purely up to you. Now in this instance, or this particular install, I'm going for the removable plate method. So I'm going to bolt the plate to the heater first, and it will stay bolted. So when I remove it for maintenance, I'll take out the heater and the plate. Now when you bolt the plate down, you must only use what I call gripper nuts. Now you'll see on the bottom side there's a sort of ridging. There's the top of the nut, there's the bottom of the nut. Normally the kit will come with these, but if it doesn't, you must not just use a normal nut. If that's the case, you'll have to use a split washer. Now I've gone belt and braces here. I put a bit of Loctite here. So we'll bolt this down. Now when you snub these up, you always do it diagonally. So you don't go this side and this side, because what you can do is you can pull the plate down on one side. So you go diagonally, you do this side, then this side, then this side, then this side, and snub them down. So I won't take any more time. I'll do that and I'll come back. Okay, this is just to show you what it's like now when we put these in. When you put the clamps on, go back to back. This is the fuel hose, this is the air intake hose. Go back to back with the clamps, and this one here, this is the exhaust. It goes, better way is to have it back to back with the fuel hose. Now as you can see, it's quite it's quite crowded in there, and it's even more so when we go through the floor, and that's our operating system in there. So things are getting very tight to be able to get a spanner on. You know, very difficult to get through and get the spanners on, and you're going to run into these nuts. Now if you're going for the removable plate method, and that's what I'm going to do in this particular install, what you can do, providing you're quite confident that this heater is just going into this install and you're not going to pull it out and put it in another vehicle, is you can cut these excess bolts off. So cut the bolts off, and then that will give you a huge more amount of room to get your spanners in, to get these Utilux clamps tightened up. So that's just a little hint. Alright, I'll come back in a bit. Now, because in this particular install I'm using the removable plate method, when I service a heater, I'll take the heater and the plate out together rather than a fixed plate. So I've cut the bolts off flush with the nuts. This will give me much more room when I'm putting in the clamps. The other thing that you have to be aware of with these is that, see this hole here? That is exposed to the outside. You don't want, if you've got a leak in the exhaust, you don't want the exhaust gas coming back up through here. Now the seal here, the silicon seal, doesn't cover this hole. The reason for the hole is sometimes you might want to bring the fuel pipe out through the floor, up in a loop, and back here onto the heater. But if you're not using that, which most people don't use, you need to put silicon in here and seal that up. Now the other thing, because this is removable, I've made a gasket down here. If you're having a fixed plate, then you would run a sealant around here and then around the edges and seal it down with silicon. But because I want to remove the plate, I've got this gasket here. I'll seal the gasket down to this part here, then I'll put silicone grease on the top side of the gasket, so I can remove the heater and the plate when I need to service it. Alright, so I'll get stuck on that and I'll come back. Now filled that hole with silicone. I've sealed down the gasket on the bottom side with a silicone adhesive, and I've put on the top side a silicone grease so I can easily remove the heater when I need to do so. Alright, so it's all ready to be turned over and bolted down. I need 2 hands for that. I'll come back in a bit. Alright, there's the heater in position. It's almost bolted down. Now, because the plate is sealed on top of this is the thickness here, a couple of thou. This plate here will be off the floor a very tiny amount. If you wish to, you can put a little washer underneath here to the same thickness. The washers are about the same thickness as this. But I've found that it actually pulls right down and there's no need to put the washer in. So when you screw it up tight, the plate has enough give in it to bend right down nice and tight and lock tight here. Alright, I've put this part in now. I'll screw that in and then I'll put the vent in. Right, it's all finished under here. So here's my exhaust pipe coming down. Nice gentle downward slope, so there's no need to put a little hole in the lower spot. Here's the combustion air inlet. I've mounted it on the bracket here for the mud guard. I put it on a bit of timber. I've run it through a little bit of conduit here and then put sealant on it so it's nice and protected there. Here's the fuel line coming in. I put the hard nylon in a bit of vinyl tubing, comes through here. This is not a fuel tap, this is actually a gas stop for an external barbecue here. And from here on, I've, as well as through the vinyl tubing, I've just put a bit of split electrical conduit on the outside to protect the fuel. So there's none of the clamps are getting anywhere near the fuel line. It's nice and tight up in here. I've just written up here because if you've got to try different spanners, you don't want to do that.